Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Secretary, for joining us today. Like you, I attended the Munich Security Conference earlier this year, and in a meeting that I had with several European prime ministers and several of your colleagues within the administration, your colleagues recognized that NATO is both bigger and better funded today than it was 10 years ago. And I am fully willing to admit that that is a byproduct of several factors, including Putin's aggression, previous administrations, and indeed a byproduct of actions by this administration and this president's first term as well. But I want to focus in today on statements and actions that I believe go beyond pressuring and leverage and actually fundamentally undermine the foundation of NATO. On January 21st of this year, in the president's speech in Davos, he said, we, quote, never got anything from NATO. 2 months later, the president said on Truth Social, speaking of NATO, they will do nothing for us. Mr. Secretary, do you share the president's assessment that we, quote, never got anything from NATO?
Well, I think what the president was speaking to at that moment, and was what I'll speak to you about now, is one of the reasons why I've been such a strong supporter of NATO is because they allow us to use these bases, because it allows us in a time of contingency, like the one in Germany and others. And for the first time, we see NATO countries denying us the use of their bases, which undermines the purpose for our involvement.
These statements, including the one we never got anything from NATO, happened before the war in Iran, which falls outside of the Article 5 invocation. It falls outside of a war of defense. Do you share the president's assessment that we, quote, never got anything from NATO?
I share the president's assessment that on issues that are a priority to the United States.
I'll take that as you disagree with his assessment that we never got anything from NATO, because, Mr. Secretary, let me reclaiming my time, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I'm asking very specifically about a specific quote. I'm not asking whether NATO can be better or reformed. I'm asking if we never got anything from NATO. And I want to specifically ask you, Mr. Secretary.
Well, why are you asking me if I can't answer?
You're not answering the question that I'm asking. You're answering a different question about whether NATO can be better or reformed. And so I'm going to move on, Mr. Secretary. Are you aware that the only time Article 5 has ever been invoked is after 9/11 in defense of the United States?
Of course I'm aware of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are you aware that more than 1,000 Europeans died in the subsequent war on terror that was invoked after?
They participated in the Middle East, correct.
Yes. And I assume you're aware that the NATO ally that lost more service members per capita is Denmark?
Denmark, I thought it was that the UK had suffered more.
More per capita.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. And I assume you're aware that Greenland is indeed part of Denmark?
For now.
Okay. Well, I want to focus in on Greenland. I joined the bipartisan bicameral trip to Copenhagen as the administration that you're a part of sought to seize Greenland. In the president's speech at Davos, he said, referring to Greenland, quote, you need ownership to defend it. Mr. Secretary, does the United States need to own land within NATO to defend it?
And the truth be told, we are actually involved in conversations with Greenland and Denmark on the use of Greenland for collective defense for all of us. It's a key part of missile defense, but we're involved in those talks right now. So I think we're in a good place on it now. But I don't want to put stuff out there in the public record that would undermine the conversations we're having with them on it.
So specifically, I'm not asking about whether we're going to do more within Greenland for our collective defense. I think all of us share that goal, including Denmark and Greenlandic people. But does the United States need to own land within NATO to defend it? That's what the president said, and that was the justification for those statements and the attempt to seize Greenland several months ago.
The president's view is that it's a lot easier to defend it when you have control and complete control of it. We are obviously having conversations with both Denmark and Greenland. They are ongoing on a monthly basis now. I think we'll have pretty good news on it at some point.
So I take that as you disagree with the literal words of the president of the United States. And I want to put a finer point.
I think he's right. If we owned it, it would be easier to defend it. But
that's not what he said. He said you need to own it to defend it, which fundamentally undermines the central tenet of Article 5 of NATO, which states that the parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against all of them, and if such an armed attack occurs, each of them will assist the party or parties attacked. So sitting here with, I'm sure, many leaders across Europe within NATO and many leaders beyond, including Vladimir Putin, potentially watching the words and listening to the words that you are saying, can you reassure our NATO allies and make it clear to Vladimir Putin that if a NATO ally is attacked and Article 5 is invoked, that we will defend them?
The United States is still in the NATO alliance, and we'll be there in Turkey to talk about all these topics. The president himself will be attending the next NATO a meeting of heads of state where all these points will be made clear. We're still in NATO, but NATO needs significant change.
Let's set the stage for what will undoubtedly go down in history as the single most explosive, scorched earth, Capitol Hill takedown of the entire year. Right out of the gate, McBride attempted to orchestrate a lethal political ambush under the blinding committee lights, weaponizing President Trump's past candid quotes from Davos and Truth Social in a highly calculated, desperate bid to back Marco Rubio into a cheap yes or no partisan corner. You could practically see the smug satisfaction on her face, convinced she had finally trapped a conservative heavyweight. But she fundamentally and catastrophically underestimated the absolute geopolitical juggernaut sitting calmly across the aisle. Instead of swallowing the bait and playing into her theatrical trap, Rubio effortlessly flipped the entire script, dropping a thermonuclear reality check that the corporate mainstream media has desperately tried to bury from the American public. Right this very second, so-called NATO allies are actively denying the United States access to our very own military bases during critical global crises. Let the sheer absurdity of that sink in. American troops, relying on American equipment, are being locked out of defense facilities, entirely funded by the American taxpayer. Rubio relentlessly shredded the Washington establishment's deep-rooted hypocrisy, leaning aggressively into the microphone to demand exactly why hardworking Americans are bleeding their wealth to fund a massive, one-sided global military apparatus for fair-weather allies who instantly turn their backs the millisecond the geopolitical heat turns up. The air was completely sucked out of the room, and realizing her carefully crafted narrative was rapidly disintegrating on live television, a visibly frantic McBride desperately pivoted to Greenland, attempting to spin the administration's brilliant strategic foresight into a doomsday assault on NATO's Article 5. She tried to loudly talk over him. She tried to frantically put words in his mouth, scrambling to regain control of a hearing that was slipping entirely through her shaking fingers. And that is exactly when Rubio incinerated her entire argument with the most legendary, unforgettable mic drop moment of the decade, when she smugly sneered that Greenland belongs to Denmark. Expecting the Secretary of State to back down, Rubio locked dead onto her eyes, didn't so much as blink, and delivered an ice-cold two-word retort that sent shockwaves through the room. For now, boom. The absolute stunned silence that followed was deafening. Without missing a single beat, he systematically dismantled her grandstanding, taking her to school on hardcore national security by proving that total sovereign control is the absolute non-negotiable bedrock of global defense, especially with looming unprecedented threats in the Arctic. He then humiliated her further by revealing that the U.S. is already executing highly productive, deeply sensitive negotiations to secure our advanced missile defense shields in the region, exposing her cheap political theatrics as a literal threat to ongoing global security. Trying to salvage whatever microscopic shred of dignity she had left, McBride launched into a desperate, patronizing history lecture on treaties, practically begging Rubio on her knees to sign a blind, endless blank check for Europe's defense. But the Secretary of State didn't flinch an inch. Instead, he roared back with a fierce, unapologetic, and fiery defense of the America First doctrine, putting the entire globe on high notice that the era of foreign freeloaders exploiting American military might, draining our finite resources, and bleeding our endless wealth is permanently and irreversibly over. Rubio made it brutally, undeniably clear that this administration is marching directly into the next NATO summit, not to bow, not to apologize, and certainly not to beg, but to demand radical foundational changes that put our country first. The message was unmistakable. if you want the ultimate unparalleled shield of American protection, you better start paying your fair share and acting like a real ally. By the time the dust finally settled on this absolute bloodbath of a hearing, Rubio hadn't just won a debate, he had delivered an absolute masterclass in unyielding American dominance, leaving a panicked, stammering McBride looking like a complete rookie, drowning in her own broken script. If you are sick to your stomach of the corrupt swamp selling out our great country to foreign interests, you need to smash that subscribe button right now, share this video everywhere to expose the radical left's utter hypocrisy, and sound off in the comments below on Rubio's epic, legendary takedown.